Aunque se preveía que el protagonismo político en Estados Unidos esta semana iba a estar centrado en el presidente por su discurso ante la Cámara, ha aparecido otro político que también ha acaparado bastante protagonismo, que ha sido el senador afroamericano del Partido Conservador, el Partido Republicano, señor Tim Scott, por su alegato diciendo que Estados Unidos no es para él un país racista en un momento en el que está asumido por gran parte del sector mediático que hay que referirse a Estados Unidos como un país racista. Y el senador Tim Scott pensaba lo contrario.
Good evening. I'm Senator Tim Scott from the great state of South Carolina. We just heard President Biden's first address to Congress. Our president seems like a good man. His speech was full of good words, but President Biden promised you a specific kind of leadership. He promised to unite a nation, to lower the temperature, to govern for all Americans, no matter how we voted. This was the pitch. You just heard it again. But our nation is starving for more than empty platitudes. We need policies and progress that brings us closer together. But 3 months in, the actions of the president and his party are pulling us further and further apart. 100 years ago, kids in classrooms were taught the color of their skin was their most important characteristic. And if they looked a certain way, they were inferior. Today, kids are being taught that the color of their skin defines them again. And if they look a certain way, they're an oppressor. From colleges to corporations to our culture, people are making money and gaining power by pretending we haven't made any progress at all, by doubling down on the divisions we've worked so hard to heal. You know this stuff is wrong. Hear me clearly. America is not a racist country. It's backwards to fight discrimination with different types of discrimination. And it's wrong to try to use our painful past to dishonestly shut down debates in the present. I'm an African American who's voted in the South my entire life. I take voting rights personally. Republicans support making it easier to vote and harder to cheat. And so do the voters. It will be easier to vote early in Georgia than in Democrat-run New York. But the left doesn't want you to know that. They want people virtue signaling by yelling about a law they haven't even read. Fact checkers have called out the White House for misstatements. The president absurdly claims that this is worse than Jim Crow. What is going on here? I'll tell you, a Washington power grab.
El discurso en favor de que Estados Unidos no era un país racista gustó mucho en sectores conservadores. Esa misma noche el señor Tim Scott fue entrevistado por el principal programa de opinión de Fox News, del señor Sam Hannity, que además denunció que después de haber hecho ese alegato, el señor Scott estaba siendo atacado en redes sociales por sectores que le calificaban de que quería ser el tío Tom del Partido Conservador, el tío Tom de la derecha norteamericana, lo cual también podría considerarse como un latiguillo racista.
Against those darker angels, and we believed, frankly, in the better angels. I wish the Democrats, who always feign or virtue signal, would take a look in the mirror and ask themselves, would they put up with that from anyone other than themselves? And if you won't police yourselves, don't look to the other side.
You know, Meghan McCain actually said something that I agreed with. If you're okay with this, don't talk to me about the important issue involving race. And I thought that was a pretty powerful statement on behalf of her. You know, I'm watching
Yes.
all of this unfold. Sad because we've known each other now many years,
Yes.
and it's just wrong. And in this woke cancel culture, it seems like there's very few areas where this type of intolerance is accepted, and it seems to be accepted by major news organizations. Yeah. Well, do you have a message to them specifically tonight?
Well, in my opinion, what they're fueling is a backlash. Maybe they don't realize it or not, but at some point, people get sick and tired of being sick and tired, and they start reacting as opposed to responding to the criticism and the negativity. Fortunately for me, I've had to endure it for the last couple of years as I keep coming to the conclusion that we got it right.
Pero, ¿qué opinaban los otros medios diferentes a Fox News? En la MSNBC, de diario progresista, Joy Reid consideró que el discurso del señor Scott había sido decepcionante porque estaba dirigido, según ella, más en gustar a los blancos que en gustar a los afroamericanos y que por tanto fue una oportunidad perdida.
This was standard Republican pabulum. This could have been delivered by Tom Cotton or Mike Lee. America's not a racist country. There's no racism here. I'm not sure what the purpose of this was. His audience to me appeared to be conservative, white Republicans who are angry over certain things of cancel culture and the same sort of cultural nods that we hear on Fox News, and he was out here to throw them a lifeline. It was disappointing. I am shocked and a bit embarrassed for him. This was a lost opportunity. Tim Scott has an opportunity to make his mark on criminal justice reform, and this ain't going to do it.
En la CNN se dijo que era una contradicción que el señor Scott dijera que Estados Unidos no era un país racista y más aún que lo dijera como representante del Partido Conservador cuando los conservadores solo tienen un senador afroamericano que es el propio Tim Scott.
This was an extraordinarily partisan speech for Tim Scott, especially I thought on the issue of policing, which is something that he's actively right now working with Democrats on. He really strongly criticized Democrats on the issue in a way that I thought was surprising, given that he apparently finds it worthwhile to actually work with them right now to get something done. So in some ways the speech kind of read to me or sounded to me like what any other generic Republican would say in this particular moment. But Tim Scott, who's trying to have a slightly different brand, it didn't really seem to fit for him, and that's the part I think that was a little bit disjointed for me with this speech.
Yeah, no, I was thinking the same thing, that he is in the midst of, by all accounts, pretty successful bipartisan talks on policing, so it was surprising to hear that. Obviously, Tim Scott is, you're talking about his brand. I mean, he has a unique voice in the Republican Party. He's the only black Republican in the United States Senate. And talking about the Democrats attacking these voting restrictions that are being passed across the country and these states as Jim Crow, worse than Jim Crow, and fighting back against that kind of rhetoric was interesting, but it's actually... It's not necessarily true that
it's not true.
It's not true. It's just not true that states like Georgia are not making it more difficult for people to vote. And, by and large, those are people of color in those states that have been able to vote more easily or were in 2020.
También en CNN el señor Van Jones fue duro con el señor Tim Scott diciendo que aunque podía decir que Estados Unidos estaba mejorando un poco, para él era innegable que el país seguía siendo racista.
He lost a lot of African Americans by the tens of millions when he said America is not a racist nation. Look, you can say that we're getting better, you can say that we've come a long way, but when you look at these numbers, when you look at these statistics, it is very clear that this country is still struggling with racism. We still have racism showing up in almost every institution. So I thought he did himself a disservice by jumping, that shark unnecessarily. That said, there's a reason they put him up. He's the best they've got. He can give that message. He can talk about. He can try to polish up all of the Republican nonsense without the sharp edges, better than the rest of them. What's amazing to me is how different he sounds from all the other Republicans.
Right.
And so. Again, it's almost a tell that the rest of the party is in such bad shape that you've got to put him up.
Y en la ABC, la cadena de Disney, en el programa de View, insistieron en que el señor Scott no era consciente de que una cosa es que hubiera Estados Unidos ciudadanos que no fueran racistas y otra cosa es negar lo que ellos llamaron el racismo sistémico que hay en Estados Unidos.
Joy, what country is Tim Scott living in? And what are your big takeaways from last night?
Well, I have two things. One, he's talking about railing against, he's talking about not playing bipartisanship. The bipartisanship is an obsession with the Republicans right now, that Biden is not reaching across the aisle, okay? And yet, when he says, Biden, we're on track to cutting child poverty in half, you look around that chamber and nobody on the Republican side is standing or clapping. Does that mean that they are for child poverty? When he says that he wants clean water, and Kevin McCarthy is sitting on his hands and not reacting, does Kevin McCarthy like dirty water? Maybe he should, campaign on that. Dirty water for everybody. Now, Tim Scott, he does not seem to understand, and a lot of them don't seem to understand, the difference between a racist country and a systemic racism. They don't seem to get the difference. Yes, maybe it's not a racist country. Maybe Americans, the majority, are not racist. But we live in a country with systemic racism. We discussed it this week again already, about housing and about education and all of the things that are important to people. And the fact that Tim Scott cannot acknowledge this is appalling. How can you go out there and say that when you just said 2 minutes ago that you were the object and the victim of discrimination? And then he says that this is not a racist country. At least acknowledge that there is systemic racism. That's what I wanted to hear from him, and he didn't say it.
I was very disappointed in Tim Scott saying that using these buzzwords like socialism, saying things like, you shouldn't really teach white children about racism because it makes them feel like oppressors. That's sort of this Republican ideology right now. I was disappointed that he said America is not a racist country without also talking about the systemic racism that is plaguing this country. I mean, why was he chosen to give this rebuttal? He was chosen because he is the only black Republican senator. He is that person. He is the person that Republicans want to put out front because of the problem of racism in this country, and he knows that. And so I was sort of disappointed that he was used in this way and didn't take that opportunity to address this type of issue head on. That was a disappointment.
Aunque el nivel más alto ha llegado en esta última jornada en la MSNBC de nuevo, donde se ha insistido que el señor Scott podría ser considerado un traidor por haber hecho ese alegato.
I think it's also one of those things where on social media, the internal conversations that many black people have about Tim Scott and the Republican Party have now made their way to the public discourse. I mean, let's be clear. Looking at Tim Scott's response, we know that he's carrying the water not just for the Republican Party and his two other black colleagues, but he did so under the Trump administration, so that's where the lack of respect comes from. When he talks about growing up in a one-bedroom house, ask yourself, why did you grow up in a one-bedroom house? Because your party doesn't believe in equality. Ask yourself why your grandfather didn't know how to read. It's because your party actually defunds education. Ask yourself why it is that you went to failing schools. It's because your party doesn't value education, especially for black youth, especially for people in the South. So the fact that Tim Scott tried to make an individual conversation when it should be a larger institutional problem that his party is part of, and one of the main reasons why we have such inequity, explains why this Uncle Tim hashtag was trending.
Tim Scott, even before this last incident, he wrote a month or so ago that, quote-unquote, woke supremacy was worse than white supremacy or as bad as white supremacy. And it was an astounding thing to say. It's indefensible to make these comments in the context of how many, I've lost track of how many black people have been killed, unarmed black people have been killed this month in encounters with police. And if he wanted to have this debate about whether or not America is a racist country, I mean, I disagree with him and Kamala Harris. Yes, this is a racist country. When we look at the institutional outcomes, every single major institution that we have has a racial disparity in what the outcomes of people's relationships are with it. And so if that doesn't qualify you as a racist country, then we just simply don't know what racism is.
When Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg can say we literally have racism baked into our highway system, I really don't think Tim Scott is in much of a position to criticize him.
I have no idea what's in the heart of Tim Scott, just to put that out there. But I mean, let's be clear. That entire party is being held hostage by Donald Trump. I think also Tim Scott is their poster boy. He's their one.
Es un debate conceptual, aunque vuelve a dejar en el aire si está siendo valorado un político más por el color de su piel que por sus palabras.
Y es que tenemos de momento 11 diputados de la ultraderecha en el Parlamento de Cataluña y que el primer diputado dirían ahora los cursis, racializado, que va a presidir un grupo en el Parlamento de Cataluña, es decir, como lo diríamos toda la vida, un negro, será de ultraderecha.
Bueno.